The Scadrians are the big bad guys of Isles of the Emberdark and maybe even the entire Cosmere. So let's talk about it. There will be spoilers in this video for Isles of the Emberdark, which is the latest of Brandon's secret projects, Mistborn eras 1 and 2, and all of the Stormlight archive. So a lot of different spoilers through this video. Let's get into it. So a quick recap is that Isles of the Emberdark takes place on a planet known as First of the Sun that others in the Cosmere refer to as the Dromonad system, and it's located roughly halfway between Roshar and Scadrial. The story is set far into the future, so after the events of both Mistborn eras 1 and 2 and the Stormlight archive conclude, and by this point it looks like the Rosharans and the Scadrians are basically locked into what is at least a strategic rivalry in the Cosmere. I already did a video where I took the Isles of the Emberdark and I kind of broke down the Rosharan pieces out of it. So today I want to do the Scadrian edition of that video. So let's start with point number 1, which is the rise of the Malwish Empire in Isles of the Emberdark. So by the time of Isles of the Emberdark, the Malwish Empire has become and consolidated as the dominant force on Scadrial, it looks like, and they've gone kind of like full expansionist, spreading their reach across the Cosmere. Back in Mistborn era 2, we already saw hints of them being kind of militaristic. They were consolidating at the time their control over the southern continent and starting to challenge kind of the northern basin. But centuries later, they've gone much further. It looks like they've unified Scadrial, roughly, not entirely, which I'll get to in a second, but roughly unified control in Scadrial, and they're patrolling like half of the Cosmere. Starling at one point even describes them as armed fascists, which again, as I'll talk about in a second, I think is not entirely fair, but she says that they have a habit of claiming lands, sending patrols, making up their own rules in the Cosmere. So yeah, this is all very on brand for the Malwish that we see in Mistborn era 2. We also see the mask tradition of the Malwish evolve from the time of Mistborn to the time of Isles of the Emberdark. The Malwish have always worn masks. In era 2, there's a note in there that says, back in the day, showing your face under the mask was taboo. But by the time we see them in era 2, they're wearing masks, but they occasionally, one of the Malwish lifts their mask to make kind of a point, like a point of emphasis. But by the time of the Isles of the Emberdark, that custom or that tradition has evolved even further. The modern style mask that we see the Malwish wear is described as having 2-inch metal grafts attached along the cheekbone and under the ears, kind of like more jewelry than mask. But I think the fact that it's metal and not wooden like it used to be in the past suggests that maybe they're employing some form of hemalurgy as well. It's kind of a fascinating cultural evolution that might suggest that the Malwish are expanding their abilities, their kind of ability to harness investiture, and it kind of mirrors how Scadrial itself has changed from divided and post-apocalyptic, the way that we see it in Mistborn era 2, to a little bit more unified and pretty aggressively expansionist. Okay, this leads me to point number 2, because I want to defend the Malwish a little bit, because we see this really interesting glimpse of what life looks like on Scadrial that is kind of similar to Earth, you could argue. So even though the Malwish seem to dominate Scadrial's politics, the society that we glimpse within Scadrial feels incredibly diverse and advanced. Dodger, who's a colonel in the Malwish military that we meet, shows Dusk a vision of, not a vision, but a glimpse of a great city on Scadrial. And it's described as a place with tall buildings, small vehicles along the flying roads, bustling people, varied features, and kind of this diverse multicultural city. And I think that glimpse kind of helps explain why the Malwish are so expansionist in the Cosmere, because they need the resources, they need trade, they need territory to support this massive, advanced, and growing civilization. We also learned something kind of fascinating about allomancy. Dodger mentions that any child with a coin can now soar. So whereas in Mistborn, allomancy was kind of limited to was hereditary and limited to people with noble blood. By the time that we see the Malwish or Scadrians in the future, it looks like that power has been democratized. So I think that while the Malwish appear fascist outwardly and they're expanding across the Cosmere, within their society, I think there's like a surprising egalitarian streak, at least technologically and culturally. Point number 3 is on internal conflict in Scadrial. So the Malwish Empire might look unstoppable, but I don't think it's without cracks. We learn in Isles of the Emberdark that the Malwish Prime Minister has been recently assassinated by somebody that people assume is a sleepless, but is actually carried out by quote-unquote partisans. And I gave it a little thought about like who these partisans might be. I think there's like a number of different potentials here. It could be like the remnants of the basin. It could be Pathians, like followers of Harmony. It could be like other groups resisting Malwish control outside of Scadrial. But either way, Scadrial isn't as united as it looks. So even while the Malwish have consolidated control, that control is not absolute. Okay, and number 4, I want to talk about Harmony. So what happened to Harmony? And this is one of the biggest mysteries in the book. In Isles of the Emberdark, we meet a character named Ed, who's like an arcanist, and a follower of Pathianism, like Harmony, the religion of like Harmony, roughly. And he says something really strange. He is talking about, I assume, Harmony, and he says, he's nice, plus he's the only living shard who performed the, and then the sentence cuts off. That single line could be a huge hint here for the Cosmere. The note about the living shard to me suggests that there are dead shards that have done this, but not ones that are currently living. So it could be a reference to like Virtuosity, who has splintered herself, and Harmony may have done something similar. And while Devotion, Dominion, Ambition were also splintered, that was done to them. They haven't like chosen to do it in the way that that line suggests. He's the only living shard that has performed the something. The reason that I think this could be a reference to splintering specifically is because I do think that Harmony is going to turn into discord by this point. The ruin side of Harmony is stronger than the preservation side, so that side will eventually win out, and Harmony will become like the discordant version of the shard. And so it's possible that Sazed chose to splinter himself in order to mitigate the damage that discord might do in the Cosmere. And if true, I think that's pretty cool. Like, I think it reframes a lot of what we might know or think about Harmony's fate. Number 5, there's one last link between Isles of the Emberdark and Mistborn that I love, which is on interplanetary travel. In the epilogue of Mistborn Era 2, we see Milan, who's a Kandra, traveling through Shadesmar with like some sort of glowing substance on the hull of her boat. And that glowing substance is basically the exact way that Dusk's ancestors, or the Dusk's people's ancestors, traveled across Shadesmar. We see Kakaban, who's like the big navigator of old from First in the Sun, navigating with that kind of glowing substance on the hull, and Hoyd travels the same way in Mistborn's secret history as well. And so I think what this shows is that like that form of interplanetary travel, using this like glowing investiture to travel across Shadesmar, that's being rediscovered in Isles of the Emberdark, was actually used, not widely, but used by some select people, some Kandra, some Hoyd, some of these Cosmere-aware people, all the way back in the past. Okay, so that's kind of my takeaway, my final thoughts. The Scadrians that we see in Isles of the Emberdark, while presented as villains, are actually like, there is some reason for their expansionist ambitions in the Cosmere. Harmony may have splintered himself to mitigate the damage that discord might do. And we're rediscovering things in the future that Scadrians of the past already knew how to do. So what do you think? I'd love to get kind of reflections on whether like people think that like Scadrians are like the tyrants of the Cosmere, or whether they're just like another semi-normal empire doing what they need to survive. And there were a lot of other mentions to different things happening on Scadrial or kind of Scadrian tech. These were the ones that I feel like really jumped out at me. So would love to know thoughts in the comments. And if you like this kind of content, please like the video, please subscribe. I'm trying to keep up my cadence of posting regularly. Thank you.